Dr. Renee Hattar, it is a tremendous privilege and joy for me to have you begin our spring season as our guest speaker on this podcast on faith-inspired leadership within the context of lead integrity. It is also a remarkable privilege that you have offered us by agreeing to be one of our members of Lead Integrity, a partner in this journey to reflect together and to be of service to the wider community when asked, but a partner in maybe strengthening the bonds and understanding of solidarity, most especially in difficult times like ours, but faith-inspired solidarity, which I think we hear about a lot, but we don't necessarily see or appreciate its manifestation, given what's going on in our world. So it's a real privilege for me, also on a personal level, to be able to see you. I've missed you quite a bit. So it's lovely to see you. And let me just introduce you to our listeners. Dr. Renee Hattar is a visiting scholar at the Catholic University of the Sacred Heart in Milan, Italy. She served from 2021 to 2026 as director of the Royal Institute for Interfaith Studies in Amman, Jordan, and holds a PhD in Peace Studies from the University of Granada, Spain. And she's a fluent Spanish speaker and writer. She is specialized in music and peace with focus on Arab Christian studies, interfaith, and peace building. She has participated in more conferences than anyone can remember, workshops, she's carried out trainings, and she's multiple writings and studies on different topics, including especially issues such as Arab Christian studies, peace building, music, and I can attest to her beautiful voice and her remarkable competence, as well as prevention of violent extremism, dialogue, interfaith. So it's a beautiful melange and mix of characteristics. She has several publications out there and is an active member in several local and international committees and study groups. She worked between 2006 and 2016 as a coordinator of the Middle East Department in the International Center for the Study of the Christian Orient in Granada, Spain, and as a professor of Arabic language and culture at the Institute of Theology Lumen Gentium, which is affiliated to the Faculty of Theology at the San Damaso Ecclesiastical University of Spain. She also served as a consultant for interfaith relations for the Spanish Episcopal Conference multiple times and for many years. In 2016, she joined officially to be the head of international studies programs and projects at the Royal Institute for Interfaith Studies and appointed its director in 2021, where she made remarkable work, which I can personally attest to. And after a long journey with the Royal Institute for Interfaith Studies, she has decided to, like me, go back to academia. And she joined the Catholic University of the Sacred Heart as a visiting scholar. Dr. Renee Hattar, very, very warm welcome to you. It is a privilege to the show, to us, and certainly to Lead Integrity to be able to have you alongside. Thank you so much for making the time. Now,
thank you, Asa.
We live in the most, shall we say, as Charles Dickens once said, we live in the worst of times and the best of times, perhaps. I don't know. What do you think, Dr. Hattar, after your long journey in so many different spaces and places, instructing, training, learning? What is your take on what's going on around us?
I was discussing this with a few friends and colleagues the past week, especially in times of Easter that we were celebrating, both the Eastern and the Western churches in the past couple of weeks. And of course, if we lose hope, it makes no sense. Because we've always had wars, we've always had difficult moments. So I was really happy to hear a few theologians and colleagues and friends talk about the theology of hope in these hard times. I think it's what keeps us going. Because if we rely on man, and by man I mean like human beings, to decide for us how we should live life, we'll always have this factor of interests, money, power, which makes life much more difficult for people like us who seek peace and tranquility and a bit of equilibrium in their life. Now, our part, I think, and it's very, very important not to lose hope. Because we were discussing today, like, especially in academia, how do we teach today our students about international politics, human rights, all these concepts that we really believed in, like peace theories, what works, what doesn't work? How do we explain that pluralism and diversity today are still a factor of richness and not of violence or war? I think we have big challenges in that sense, to figure out ourselves new creative ways of transmitting that. That's why I believe in the role of music. But at the same time, not to lose our own faith, because sometimes we ourselves become more vulnerable to what we teach, especially because what we are witnessing is very, very hard. And when you witness it so closely, people like me and you who come from the Middle East, who have families in our countries and in the neighboring countries, we're not talking about numbers. That's why all the time through the work at the Royal Institute with His Royal Highness Prince Hassan bin Talal and with other authors that you are familiar with as well, we were always talking about humanizing the numbers. We need to stop talking about people as numbers and talk about them as the people we know who mean something to everyone. Family members, friends, colleagues, and I think that's the most important part.
Well said. And I think it's the humanization of the numbers is becoming increasingly harder to build into the imagination of our daily struggles, especially because it seems as if some lives are more worthy of being humanized than others. And we are in a context where you can actually see the global geopolitical system led by specific actors and having more of a say over the others, which also means that those specific lives have more validity and relevance than others. And we're looking at a realm where it's hard to find leadership, such as, for instance, that which is provided by His Royal Highness Prince Hassan bin Talal, who's a very unique person in the world, certainly, and most certainly in the Middle East. But we need more of that kind of leadership, which is deeply rooted in wisdom and knowledge and egalitarian principles, but is also rooted in a humility that comes with faith. And what is faith inspired? What is the value added to you, Renee, in your own now, when your life, when you look back at all the different things you've done, all the different folks you've met, all the different initiatives you've led and created, and what is it that stands out, if anything, as the specific value added of being inspired by faith? Is there something interesting or specific or valuable or new to being inspired by faith?
It's really funny because it's a classic answer, yet at the same time, I mean, it sounds new, but it's not new. It's really to have a compass that, especially in hard times, you can still find the values, the human values. You can still find kindness and love in people. So I think people today, when they talk about religion, they are so afraid because they talk about violence, they talk about conflicts, and everybody's confused about what's the difference between religiosity, faith, religions. So we enter in this pool, I think, of so many concepts and so many ways of seeing this, and it's not cool enough to be religious today. You know, you need like more creative ways. People talk about being spiritual but not being religious. Now, regardless of how people see this, but when you are deeply rooted in one faith, regardless which faith, I think you find the hope I was talking about, happiness in God, because you know that at least there you find the values you're talking about, and you find the role model you're talking about, rather than the leaders today. Most of them, they don't walk the talk. All they do is like give us sermons, and any kind of leader, by the way, even religious leaders, many of them just give us sermons, but they don't act upon their words. And that is, I think, today the most difficult point, especially for young people, to find a role model, to find somebody they can follow. If people do not stick to their words with their actions, I think that's the worst part. And this is what we are experiencing today. So I think when you go back to the roots, to these values, to these, especially when you talk about love, any God in any religion would not want violence. It makes no sense. And today, all these leaders who justify their wars in the name of God, I think is the charade today. It's the most difficult part to accept, because God did not create us to make us suffer. I think this is what we miss in the story. So this is also, if you are strong in your faith and believe in all these values, you won't have problems with other faiths. Because it would reflect your love, the love you feel from God and you have towards Him, you also feel towards the others from other faiths and other backgrounds, regardless of what they believe in. But you do believe that they are your brothers and sisters, and that God created them to His picture as well as, you know, He created you. So it makes no sense to be violent or hateful or pessimistic all the time. I think this is the part that brings us this beauty from a faith perspective.
And yet we see, but I fully concur, by the way, but I think just looking at reality around us, we see politicians using religious rhetoric, like you were saying, to justify the worst atrocities against one another. And we see religious actors in their diverse guises, whether they're religious leaders, whether they're specific religious communities, who also justify, who indeed seem to be calling for atrocities, really, and or who stay silent or speak out quietly in themselves amongst their own safe communities. So yet we see that that too is unfolding and taking place. How would you explain to, let's say, your students, the communities of people that are saying, why is this that you're supposed to be religious and advocating for coexistence and love, and yet you seem to think and call for blood?
I think this is the eternal struggle between good and bad, good and evil. And I think we need to remember that even religious leaders or politicians or whomever we're talking about are still people. They're humans. So they are easily attracted to evil when evil is mixed with power, money, authority, etc. And this is what makes it worse, because when we have authority and ego enters in the middle, we think we are gods. We think we can do anything and everything, and this is, I think, the one of the characteristics of a human being. That's why the same reasons that make us blame these people are the same reasons that can make us understand where they're coming from, and not project this on God or religion, but project it on what it is. That this is the making of human beings. And therefore, I can have the liberty and the decision to be a good person or a bad person. Or in my case, I think I always talk to them about everybody is a good person to me. They're just doing good deeds or bad deeds. So the decision of making a decision by yourself to do a good deed or a bad deed is this conflict, I think, between good and evil.
And what would you say is needed now as people of faith and of no faith on such polarized sides of many spectrum, political, cultural, social, religious, financial, obviously, with the tremendous inequities we're seeing around us, which are only increasing day by day as a war drags on that is costing plenty. What would you say, what would you like to see happen around us, Renee, and something that you feel you may be able to contribute to as well, or are contributing to already effectively?
I think it's the solidarity and the empathy with people, especially people in need. Because like, even if you consider the basic stuff, like rich people do not give as poor people. Sure. Even when you try to help, it's always been like that. So it's the same. Politicians or landlords who are warlords, who are doing wars, they have their own interests. They will not think about human beings. They will not think about the children, the women, and the people they're killing. But we can help each other. We can stand in solidarity with each other. We can still continue to talk about rights and justice, social justice, because this is what we all need, not because we are supporting a system over another or we're supporting an institution over the other. I was telling my students that the concept of human rights was always a noble concept. Now, how they are being projected and applied today by the powerful is another story. But as a human family, an international family, what we need to do is stand next to each other. Together we are power, and this is how we can influence the decision makers. Now, I know that this year has been so difficult to believe that we can be stakeholders, especially because the powerful are making all the decisions regardless of respect to any of these laws, any of these agreements. They're breaking all the laws. But I think there will be a moment where they have to stop, because I think the world cannot be silent about this. The entire world, the entire universe. We have to stand together and make a difference, I think. And I'm talking about non-violence, by the way. I'm not talking that we need to make anybody stop with violence, because violence is a vicious circle. So we can teach, speak, sing, stand together, share our food, share our resources, regardless of how simple they are. But this is what we can do at this moment.
What are some of the times, maybe just mention one or something, a time in your mind, a moment in your own career, in whichever space or sector, where you thought of something to do, something to build, an initiative to undertake, or whatever, and you're quite proud of it. You feel it really did make the kind of dent, no matter how minimal, that you believe in, that you believe is necessary. Is there something in particular that you would like to hold up and just reflect on with us today?
Yes, I think it was one of the projects that I did with Music and Peace, and that time I myself had my doubts about how I can help, especially people of post-conflict, because I was working with a group of Iraqi Christians after their persecution from Mosul, and everybody knows the story. So the hardest part was, how do I make a difference with these people? How do I convince them that I'm doing a good thing? And am I really doing a good thing for them? Especially that the project initially was to do some capacity building. So my question was, why would these people need capacity building? Are they really ready to receive anything from anyone that is not patronizing at this moment, especially that they have lost their sons, members of their families, everything they owned? They were talking about people, most of them who were really well off in Iraq. They had a very good economic situation, their homes, their belongings. They were studying at universities, they had their own businesses, etc. And in one day, literally, people came and told them to leave their houses with nothing. Some of them, their kids were kidnapped to have a ransom, and then they were killed anyways after they paid everything. Tragic stories, very tragic stories. yet the faith they had was really remarkable. And I think that was my point of hope as well. So what I did is literally give them a space to express themselves. That was the base of our work. And through music and arts, what we did is try to express ourselves together in a safe space. So we were repeating all the time that this is a safe space. We don't expect anybody to be judged. Whatever you say, nobody's here right or wrong. All we need to do is talk to each other. Because the first thing I noticed is that, especially the men, they were silent. They were so depressed that they did not want to speak. They were seeing all this injustice around them and they couldn't do anything. And they found themselves in a position that we are the men, we are the providers, we cannot work, we don't have a work permit, we cannot return back to our country because it's not safe, and we cannot leave the country, which was the buffer zone, which was Jordan, to receive a visa, because we're still waiting for a visa for any of these foreign countries to give us asylum and leave. So they were like literally stuck in a space where they could not do anything. And all the international community was suggesting programs to empower the women, but not the men.
Interesting.
In a situation where they were all in need of this help. And my shock was with the little ones, with the children, because the program targeted everyone. And the children and the teenagers could not write or read in Arabic because they could not go to schools. Many of them were in the community schools with some help, but they could not go to their schools as usual, and they did not learn. They arrived as children. They were speaking Syriac or Syriac in their homes, and that was it. Chaldean or Assyrian or Syriac, according to the community, and they did not learn Arabic. So through music, it was a new language for them, which they did not need to learn. So they were literally learning the partitures, how to read and how to sing. And through the Iraqi music and the Levantine music, and especially the church music of Iraq, they found this space of trust, I think, and nostalgia to speak about the happy moments in Iraq before they came to Jordan, but also to think about the sad moments, but in a different way. So what really touched me is that at the end of the project, after 1 year and a half, just to see a smile upon their faces and to tell you that we felt at home, we did not feel as refugees anymore. We had the space to speak at the same level. We ate together, we spoke together, we had the same meals. To them, that was more than enough. And to me, it was heartbreaking because I thought this was the basic stuff that they should have every day. But apparently, it's not what they had every day as refugees. And I always tell them, like, a forced migrant was forced to leave their country. They were living the best of ways, in a rich country of resources, of people, of culture, and they had to leave. It's not that they want to leave. So any society that receives them, I think, should have that in the back of their heads. But we are humans at the end of the day, so we listen to the politicians. We think that they are taking something out of our way, work, water, resources, whatever. Sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not true. But regardless, I think this human part we miss all the time, that you need to think of the other as yourself, and that what happened to them could happen to any of us.
Yes.
And this is where we started to speak about empathy, solidarity, and citizenship, because you don't need to have a Jordanian passport to be a citizen. At the end of the day, we have the right for refuge, for education, for sanitation, regardless of what our passport is, or this is how it's supposed to be, right? And they were telling me, like, at least they were lucky in Jordan, because in other parts, many people were also, living harder, let's just say, conditions, and they did not even get the chance to leave or to be well received, etc., etc. So I think that was one of the moments where I think hope returned to me as well when you see the results directly with the children, because they found friends within the Jordanians as well. They felt for the first time that they had a good thing, a good hobby, a well-guided thing to learn, because they did not go to schools and to fill their free time. They had a lot of free time. instead of just the mobile. So they actually had actual friends, physical friends. They were learning together, they were singing together, they learned a lot together, and it was fun for them. And then, of course, they learned the instruments, and we gave them the instruments to take home and practice, which was wonderful. And then with the adults, these moments of sharing, of understanding, of explaining themselves, and feeling appreciated, to live with dignity. And this is exactly what they were looking for.
Mm. So would you say that the musical aspect added a very integral, because empathy, solidarity, welcoming with a sense of dignity, integrating within the larger community in a respectful and warm way, all of these are certainly very critical, each of them, and together. Would you say, because this is something I'm actually learning from you, I learned from you a long time ago when we both were together in a conference, and it was one of those conferences, again, that, you meet a lot of wonderful people and you talk, and each one talks, and then you talk together. But somehow we ended up with some of the women in a separate room, and we just sort of closed the door, and you started singing and the other women started singing, and it was the most beautiful highlight to me of the conference. I remember nothing of what was said, but I do remember the intense joy of listening to the singing, and that particular, I guess the only word I know is magic that happens when especially because so much of the songs were also spiritual songs from different faith traditions. And that left a very, very deep imprint with me about all of your work. So I think I'd love to ask you, do you feel as if that musical part has a special resonance in this world of peacemaking that perhaps is not paid much attention to, or is usually reserved to specific spaces that don't become the mainstream of peacemaking and peace building? What do you think about music in that space?
Usually the reactions I receive is that music is not serious enough. It's merely for entertainment. And when you talk about spiritual music or religious music or sacred music, depending on how people call it, people start finding ways of telling you that it's not good enough. This is not the space to use it. Is it permitted or prohibited, etc., etc. So they enter in all these, but once they hear you sing or they enter, they become part of the actual musicking and the music making. It's totally different. They share the moment. They feel, they cannot control their feelings. What they tell you is what they are trying to make sense of because they heard it somewhere or because they want to criticize what you're doing, but it's not what they feel exactly. So once you start, there's this, I think it just literally breaks all these limitations, but also breaks these frontiers between us as humans. We start to listen, and we have to listen in order to enter in harmony, because we need to sing back or play back with each other. So if we don't listen, we lose the harmony, and then it's people listening who will judge us. So it's a win-win situation if we really listen to each other and then speak. In that sense, then sing or play. And I think this is how I apply the theories of dialogue to music and vice versa. Because today, I think the hardest part is to listen, not to talk. And many people are waiting for you to finish to make you hear what they're saying, to voice out, because I think we don't have enough time to voice out today, or because we don't know how to do it sometimes. And that's another aspect I work on with young people, especially post-conflict. We don't know how we feel, so we don't know how to express it. And this is where we become conflictive or sometimes reach the point of violence because we don't know how to do it. So through music, what we do is learn to wait, to find this inner peace while we're waiting, instead of being agitated all the time. Listen very carefully and then start to express, or even think about what we want to express. Maybe we heard it already. Maybe we felt it already. And this is why I also speak about inner peace, because if you don't have inner peace, you cannot reflect outer peace. and you cannot speak about peace. So the music, I think, to me, it has so many aspects, and the part of spiritual music, what is added to it is also the peaceful part, because you choose the texts. So all these values of peace, of love, of beauty are also in the texts, not just in the melodies. And I think this is the dimension of spiritual music that I work on. And what you heard in that conference, which I remember very well because it was so rich and so beautiful, is also that we were talking about certain traditions where the spiritual music was also a mix of popular music that the mothers chanted. So in some part of my studies, I also study in popular music and ethnomusicology when these texts were more religious and became mundane, or when they were mundane and became religious, because they're so close and they're so interconnected, especially with the ideas they reflect. And that's the beauty of it, I think.
Very beautifully said. And I know that some of my listeners and viewers will also see this, but your entire aura changed when you're talking about this. This is obviously something that is very close to you and very much part of you, but it's also part of your light. So it was very nice to actually see you and hear you speak to all of this. And it is certainly an area that I think in let's say mainstream peacemaking, peace building efforts undertaken at the international level, even at ordinary national levels, it's this area of musicology and how it is such a fundamental building block of human connection, may not be taken as seriously as you said. People approach it very cerebrally. This isn't serious enough, when in fact it may be the most serious, the most impactful.
Yeah. But I have seen some change, as just to also be hopeful again, that today in many venues where I'm invited, especially at universities, seminars, etc., they all talk to me about creative ways of making peace, like talk about peace building, theories of peace, but in creative methods. And I think I was so optimistic to learn this year, especially, that more and more people believe in this change. And more people are talking about the importance of this harmony created by music, and these safe spaces, even for a moment, where we can find this inner peace and maybe contemplate these moments. Because I think the hardest part today is to steal these moments of our hectic days, of our violent days, to find these small moments of peace where we can reflect, find this inner peace, and think of God, maybe of a prayer of hope that we cannot find amidst all these wars and violence that we're living through.
And it's not as simple as playing spiritual music into an audience. It is actually what you described as a dialectic of listening, partaking, giving back in a sense as you listen. It's an engagement. There's a tremendous amount of, it's built around the reciprocity of singing souls. So there's actually a methodology to it. Several, I would assume, depending on the different traditions and regions and whatever. So it is actually a very serious discipline. It isn't just, well, let's have a good time together and sing some spiritual songs with one another. There is obviously, and this is one thing I observed in that particular meeting too, is how you approached it was not like just let's just sing together. There was an engagement that took place amongst all of us in that room, where you brought us in and responded, and there was definitely an engagement on all sides. It was a reciprocal, engaged manner of being with one another. And I think this is an area that I'm happy to hear you're seeing more and more engagement with and resonance with and acceptance of. I'd like to see this on a global scale in multiple fora and formats, because I think that really is what we're missing. We're hearing the cannons of war much more than we're hearing the music of spiritual engagement. And I think this is
also, Azza, because I was talking to one of the students the other day who would love to do this but doesn't know in which discipline, because we are still also I mean, many people are talking about interdisciplinarity, but when it comes to your field of studies, or they always tell you to do the same, like find one line.
Exactly.
So if it's, I don't know, political science, it's political science. If it's theology, if it's theology. Why can't we do an interdisciplinary thing, like within the field of international studies? And I think this is the difficult part of my specialty, is that I study religion, theology, history, music, interfaith. It's all together, right? But this is what makes people. I mean,
Yes, exactly.
this is what makes life itself. So I was telling them the most important part, whether you're teaching children, or you're a policymaker, or you're training choirs, the most important part in this theory I'm working on is to spread a culture of peace. If we get to prevent the conflicts, we don't have to think of the resolution, which is the utopia. I mean, have you seen any conflict being resolved today? Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan. I mean, the list could start, but if you start a conflict, that's it, there's no going back. But if we try to prevent the conflict from happening, especially if we spread the culture of peace and we have reasonable people to say no to conflict, then this is what we're trying to do. So you start at an early age with these children who become adults, who become part of this decision making, and this is the hope of this work.
So you talk about spreading the culture of peace, and that's a very busy arena globally. There's been so much work done on the culture of peace and so on. And within that space has also been quite a bit of engagement with interfaith relations and dynamics, which, you've been part of, you've led, and so on. And I'm curious about something that we both share with many others, which is to be a woman leader in an interfaith setting, or even in a religious setting, but let's focus on the interfaith because we're talking about culture, which can't just be one faith, it's going to have to be plenty. What have been some of your own experiences being a woman leader in an interfaith space, so to speak? Go ahead.
That's a big question. I think the challenges have been so big, and you might have experienced many of them, because in the field of interfaith, let's face it, it's because of so many religious leaders are men, it is a man's world. I mean, as a field, let's just say. So many times women's opinions or presence is looked at as they should be here, so we tolerate them. Not everybody thinks you can bring something to the table. And this is very challenging. And I think many of the religious leaders, since you're not a religious leader, they think, shouldn't she be at home with her family or something, and of course many of them, because they are politically correct, they don't say it, but you see it. When you feel it, you're there.
Yes.
Exactly. And many of them are all the contrary. They think your contribution is very important, because you're a woman, because you see things differently, and you have a different perspective. Whether you were married and have a family and have kids, or you were single, or you were religious, I think they find that. But I think there's also another very difficult part where you're not a religious leader. I mean, you're faith-based, but you're not a religious leader. So not only you're a woman, but you're also not religious. You're a lay person. So many different religions have a problem with that. Many different leaders have a problem with that. But if we think of the positive part, those who believe you can bring something to the table know that women don't think like men. And I'm not just talking about the equality and all these things we try to fight as women, and all these feminist movements try to fight. I'm talking about how we receive love from God, how we act with love in our lives. They think we're more, I don't know, romantic maybe, or more, we act with our feelings. We're not very objective sometimes. But I think in this world of violence, maybe you need some sentiments with all these decision makers. And of course, that's not the only part that women bring. But I think this was one of the things we discussed in that conference, is that many women do not want war because they don't want to lose their sons, they don't want to lose their husbands, they don't want to lose their fathers, etc., etc. So they are the part that can bring some, let's just say, balance to the equation, and give you a different perspective on how you see peace, how you see war, how you see economics even, because at the end of the day, it is the woman who cooks, who stays at home, who organizes everything. Of course, not every woman, but at least our experience in areas where the woman is the leader of the house, at least. If not to produce and sell, to bring something to the table, but also to organize how the family is working and functioning in the household, outside the household, education, etc. And today, when I was training teachers, the vast majority were women. They are in the education field, they are in the of course, in scientific fields as well, maybe in our part of the world a little bit less. But yeah, I think the presence of women in all these fields brings something new to the table, even though it's so challenging when it comes to the faith-based.
Just bear with me a second, but do you not feel that this might also sort of essentialize women a lot? Like there's something very unique to what women bring to the table, when we also know that many women leaders in politics and finance and even in religion are not necessarily the nicest, kindest, most giving souls. So is that also?
Of course, but this is another thing, because we cannot forget that in order to give women a space, we also created this positive discrimination quotas in so many fields on so many levels. So sometimes you say, thank God for the quota because I was invited, because I have something to say. And some other days you say, oh my goodness, because you're really not choosing the perfect person for this position. You're just filling the quota because this person had all the boxes that we need to be ticked in order to be selected. So it is a weapon, I think, of double effect in that field. So I totally agree with you.
So therefore, what would you advise the women who? What would your message be to the younger generation of men and women who are in the interfaith space, who or in the religious spaces? What would your advice to them be as they are obviously attracted and engaged in such spaces? What would you want them to be mindful of?
I think I don't want to sound, I don't know how to put this, but I think they should decide whether they do have something to say or not. I feel that many times we need to reflect more, read more, and maybe silence sometimes is even more important than words. And I know you know exactly what I'm talking about, because many times, in order to prove ourselves that we are at the table, we have to talk. And if you don't talk, you're not invited again. So we shouldn't be attracted to how the not the system, but the network works. We should reflect into what can be my part, why do I want to be part of this, and how I can make a difference. And I think to take role models from history, I was reading about saints and religious leaders within history, even bishops at the times of different religions, in Christianity, for instance, or influencers in the world of Islam. There was this great project we were working on with Ana Lopez at the University of Valencia in Spain. And we were talking about the women leaders and role models who were artists and scientists and people who made a difference, especially in contact with their faith throughout history. And unfortunately, were not mentioned in history because the credit goes to their husbands or their brothers or whomever was there in that moment of history. Now, many of them took credit, but not as they should have, let's just say. So I think taking and learning from these role models is also very important. Not to be in a field where you just want to prove that you're a woman or fight for the fact that you're a woman rather than fight for the idea that or the concept that you want to convey.
And Is there something that you feel that women from um, the Arab region in particular, given the context of history, which has always been very, very tumultuous, um, is there something that you feel Arab women in particular may bring to this global space of refugee integration, peace building, politicking, this very interest-based, highly unequal space? Is there something that you feel Arab women in particular may be able to bring that adds value?
I always thought of their experience in the lands they live in, and I think after reflecting and seeing other women in other parts of the world, like in Latin America, for instance,
Yes.
we are so similar. We have so many similar experiences that you cannot say this is particular to Arab women and this is particular to different women. I think each woman in her own community, in her own experience, brings something new to the table. And sometimes it's so similar, sometimes it's so different. But maybe we ought to think most of the time that people who suffer more bring different experiences to the table, and people who are more privileged, let's just say in other parts of the world, cannot feel the same way or cannot convey the same message, which is kind of true on a social level, on an economic level. But I think as human beings, this is why I talk a lot about solidarity, because again, we remember this group and we were singing together, and each one of us had comes from a culture where you had a different suffering, but you still suffered from something when it came to war and peace. And I think this is where we learned from each other, and the things we had in common were absolutely amazing. What we suffered from throughout history, why we think as women we had something to say, and many of them said them through these popular songs or spiritual songs in these texts. So yeah, I mean, Arab women are so brave, and they suffer from all these different let's just say situations in wars, in peace, in conflict. But they're not the only ones. I think this can be found anywhere in the world.
Definitely, and I think the value is also understanding that the region that was referred to by our colonial uh, hegemons as the middle of the East for them, it also includes our Iranian and for a while now also Israeli uh, people, and therefore it's not just the Arabness, if you will, but it is indeed the commonality of struggling in the respective
Yeah.
countries and nationalities. But your point about also privilege providing a particular insight, if you will, but being sensitive to that privilege is something that is so critical to race theory, to intercultural dynamics, to ethnicities and interethnic issues. It's actually very central, this positionality towards
Yeah.
either privilege or suffering or both does indeed color our understanding. I love that you've maintained significantly, no matter what issue we're talking about, you've kept this emphasis on what women can bring to the table. That is not necessarily all rosy and glowy and wonderful and terrific, but is also about very different experiences, insights that we are born and created, even metaphysically, to manifest, to live, to provide. So yes, there is a difference that is brought by being female, if you will, being a woman. And I think it is a kind of perhaps overall something that is missing from our monotonous, even with little differences here and there, but monotonous. And you mentioned this in terms of the male domination. I think we are still living actually, and maybe even experiencing a resurgence of male domination, pretty much misogynistic, not just male, but that it actually begs the question even more in a context like this: what is it that the diversity of races, ethnicities, genders, religions can bring? And I think I just want to say, in your own work, Renee, because you're never going to say this, but in your own work, you have always demonstrated a value added, multiple value added, which is one of the reasons I wanted to reach out to you to hear your voice as you articulate your own thoughts. I just want our listeners to know you've you've provided us with a drop in the ocean of what Renee Hattar brings and does and manifests and enables. There's a tremendous richness to your wisdom and your service that I think we will spend our lifetimes appreciating. So I thank you
Yeah,
for being yourself, and I thank God for you. And welcome on board Lead Integrity, which speaks volumes. But I think you're joining us as a genuine tribute to the work that we're all trying to do together. It is fundamentally about solidarity, with a nuance of diversity that perhaps especially women can bring, but not only, by no stretch of the imagination. So thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Azza. This is so humbling, and it's really a pleasure to be with you on Lead Integrity and to be in contact. We've known each other for some time. We're friends. We're not just colleagues. So it's been always fun to work with you, not just a privilege to learn from you. So thank you so much for the beautiful words. I don't know if I deserve all this, but it's a true pleasure to be able to share. And I hope I gave something in this podcast, and I hope I can continue to be of service.
You can, inshallah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Azza.